It's Faye and Jeff from earlytrauma.com, and we're here to talk about back to school time and how the TDCs may interfere with our kids' academics. We're only focusing on two today, on the negative internal working model and developmental delays. So Jeff, when we talk about negative internal working model and going back to school, I can only imagine what you're going to say.
Well, let's go back, take a step backwards and look at the definition of a TDC first.
Okay.
The definition of a TDC is it's a trauma disrupted competency that is engendered in our children by the early trauma. So it's a competency that wasn't quite mastered or was mastered inappropriately at an earlier age, and now it's causing problems at their current developmental stage or age appropriate stage. So the first one we're going to look at is a negative internal working model. That's that picture that a child stores in the back part of their brain of themselves, of their caregiver, and of the world at large. And when that picture gets formed that in a way that sounds like this, I'm bad, primary caregivers are bad, and the world is a dangerous place, then what that does is that creates a lot of fear, unnecessary fear in their life. So much fear that very often, they learn to ignore it. They treat fear and being afraid as if it were a baseline, as if it were just a normal, acceptable part of being any place or any time.
I can only imagine what it's like for a kid to feel like they're a bad kid, that, we can even broaden it out, that they really don't have value, and that the adults around them can't be trusted, that they're bad people too. For me, that just leaves a child so alone in the world because you don't know who to turn to.
Well, I've lost track over the years of the number of children who were diagnosed, if you will, or told you have problems with transitions.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. And what I tell people is that negative internal working model, that I'm bad, caregivers are bad, the world's a dangerous place, that means transitions are going to be getting worse. It doesn't leave any room for things are actually going to get better. If everything is bad, a change means everything's going to get worse.
So a transition, and just logical sense, means a change. We're changing from one place to the other, or from one group to the other. There's change coming.
Exactly. So when we look at going from summertime to school time, that's a huge transition. Just about everything in that child's life is going to change. Going to bedtime often changes. Getting up time in the morning changes. The immediate morning routine changes, becomes a lot more demanding. Then there's waiting at the bus. Then there's riding the bus. Then getting to school. Transitioning from school or from the bus to usually a holding pen of some sort before they actually get to go to the class. Then they go to the class, and now they're bombarded with all kinds of new demands and personnel, and even their peers change.
Yeah, I'm thinking back of the days of before school as a mom, and it wasn't the first day of school these things occurred. We put it into practice at least a week or two before, all right, everybody, and, parents tend to have a very happy smile on their face when they think about the kids going back to school. It's like, oh, good, this is great. We're going to practice. You are going to go to bed now at 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, and you're going to get up bright and early, and we're going to go buy school clothes and backpacks and a zillion notebooks and pens and pencils. And it's like, that already looks like a lot of work. You're buying big packs of pencils and big stacks of paper. The kids have to be really scared because it's like, I've got to write that much this year. You're buying this many supplies.
It is an incredible transition from summer life summertime life, the way we do education, summertime
Mhm.
life to back to school time.
Yeah,
It's just one big, fat, juicy fear fest.
you're going from flip-flops to at least tennis shoes every day, and most likely socks, and more formal type of clothes, even though they're technically casual. They're not jeans or shorts and a t-shirt. They become, and mom's saying, you take care of these school clothes now. I don't want you getting stained and stuff. So there's another pressure that's going on. And don't lose that backpack this year.
We very often fail to recognize how our frontal cortex, our ability to think, how we start to minimize and adapt to the changes that are in front of us before we even begin it. It's important to remember that the child with that negative internal working model they're gonna struggle. They're gonna have a part of them that just goes, it's all gonna turn out bad. We're gonna be in big trouble.
And so just look at that child's perspective. They're having all these fears mounting and compounding up and up and up. And mom is happy. Mom is joyful. It's like,
looks rather maniacal from
yes,
that
it
standpoint,
does.
doesn't it?
Well, and remember the office supply company's commercial
Mhm.
when the dad is going through the store singing and
Mhm.
throwing stuff in the cart.
That most wonderful time.
Of the year.
So what do we do about this? How do we help our kids with this fear? Let's just give 3 quick interventions.
Well, just to begin with, I always like to, especially our kids with trauma and even our healthier kids, to have pre-visits to the school. Arrange that before the kids come into school so that they can navigate, especially when it's a new school building or there's new teachers, new routines that's going to be happening in a school, so that you go ahead.
What you're talking about is the very, I'd say it's a parent of an infant. When they give a fear, the parent actually makes the trigger go away. So the technique you're talking about is you reduce the impact of the trigger. You put a little distance between them and the trigger. You make it a little smaller. You introduce them to things ahead of time.
Yeah, and I wouldn't count on our kids saying, I'm really scared about school this year. They're going to they actually may just be dismissive and oppositional because it's another fear. You're going to take me into a building that I don't want to go into to begin with. So
what do you do about that?
We just say, I want to go and you're coming along because I want to see where you're going to be. I want to go see your classrooms. I want to see what's happening.
Well, I was thinking of the intervention. Basically, we narrate, we talk to them ahead of time about the fact that they're going to have a part of themselves that's going to be scared. That's going to feel fear, even though their thinking brain might tell them, I don't need to be afraid of that. They're still going to have a part of them that is afraid. That part of them that believes I'm bad, caregivers are bad, and the world is not safe, that's going to be generating fear. So one of the techniques is to just talk to them about that experience.
Well, so I'm thinking then, maybe it would be a good idea for, mom and dad to sit down and say, these are all the things that my kid's going to be facing. We need to name those things, like just as we went through the list. Change in bedtimes, change in morning routines, changing the types of clothes you're going to wear. All those little pieces that we dismiss. We just take it for granted because, we spent our 12, 13 years in regular school and however many years in college and all. We just we're not in touch with those. So go back and to create a list of similar things like we've been listing here. So these are the fears, and we need to start talking about those things and even our own experiences when it came to that.
Yeah, it's very important for the child to know that when we create that list, when we narrate the transitions that they're going to be facing, the fear that it's going to cause, that we share that fear with them, that we tell them we've had times when we've had scary stuff too, that we've had to go ahead and do transitions that left us a little fearful, and we have to be able to narrate our experiences of it and share the techniques that we use to handle that fear. Because certainly no one gets to go through life without doing transitions.
And we can always come up with funny stories, the itchy wool sweater that grandma insisted that I wear every day to school, those kind of things, and talk about our own times and how we manage that too. So anyway, I think really getting the kids concretely getting them into the places where their fears are going to take place, help them navigate the hallways, navigate going to the lunchroom where the principal's office is, just in case they might need it.
Yeah. Use the element of parts so that they can experience the fear as separate from themselves, but still present. And then again, narrate your own experiences and come up with strategies together to deal with that fear. Even if the child says, I'm not going to be afraid of that, you can say, well, a part of you will be, but I'm glad to see that the rest of you isn't. Come up with strategies. What about the second TDC?
Oh, developmental delays.
Developmental delays. How does that interact with going back to school?
Well, a developmental delay takes place because the child hasn't completed or mastered one of their milestones. Or as we know with our kids, there are many milestones, many different areas that they haven't mastered. So now we're asking a kid with one, like a maturation, the emotional maturation stage of, let's say 6, but chronologically the child is 12. So now there's a disparity with this 12-year-old who's mature as a 6-year-old going into a 12-year-old.
Are you talking about emotional regulation?
No, I'm talking about just that emotional maturation. Many of our kids are, that's where developmental delays come from, delayed in organization, thinking skills, processing skills, physical skills, emotional skills. There's
okay, I like that breakdown right there. So let's give them an example of 2 or 3 physical. Let's go do 2. We'll do 2 physical skills. What's a physical skill that wasn't mastered at a previous age?
So simply, some of our kids come into care not even being able to hold a fork. And now we're saying, here's a pencil, hold the pencil correctly so that you can have good penmanship. So just holding a pencil is a problem. Tying shoes. I'm gonna give you more. Running, throwing a ball. These are all things. If you've spent the first couple years of your life sitting in a playpen in a crib, housed up in a room, hotel rooms even, you're not going to have the experiences that get you there.
So if you don't have age-appropriate mastery of some of these physical skills, and now you're transitioning from home environment to a brand new school setting, and inside, I don't have these skills, what does that make them feel?
I'm going to go back to your term that you use so often, fear fest.
Yeah. And remember, it's our job as adults, okay, to help them recognize those fears in their life and to come up with strategies for handling the fear that allow them to keep moving through life and not become arrested and held up. So all those physical things you're talking about, throwing a ball, running, holding a pencil, sitting at a desk, is a physical skill. When those aren't mastered at an age-appropriate developmental level, then there become sources of fear when the child envisions himself moving into this new environment.
Yeah, I'm thinking recently, one of the families we worked with, the family didn't even have books in the house. And we helped them facilitate getting a desk for their child to sit in, just so that the child could do schoolwork in that desk. Take that kid from such an environment and put them in a classroom where it's like books.
Now, the second category you mentioned was emotional development. So what happens to a child who doesn't have an age-appropriate ability to process, to recognize and process fear in their life in the present tense? What happens to them when they go to school?
Well, let's back up a little bit. How they got to that point was there wasn't an emotionally attuned caregiver, someone there present to say, you are afraid. I will help you with your fear, to be in that.
Hang on, Faye.
Okay, sure.
Some of those people did have emotional caregivers present, but they were unable to connect to that emotional caregiver because of their early trauma. So the problem is they didn't have an emotionally attuned caregiver that they could connect to.
Mm-hmm.
Then they do.
The child is left alone to manage the fear.
So now they've got all these strategies in their head, right? To handle fear alone.
Well, usually it's fight, flight, freeze, or fold.
Yeah.
So often the first one is just get angry and scream and yell. That's one way to draw your caregiver in to at least get your food and your diaper changed. Mm-hmm. Is just scream and yell.
Well, as we teach, the first skill that children learn after cry out to an emotionally attuned caregiver, the first skill they learn is to turn their scared into mad. Mm-hmm. If you have a child that feels fear in an environment from somewhere and immediately turns their scared into mad, what are they going to do? Fight, flight, freeze, or fold, right?
Yeah.
And let's say it's fight. Suddenly, mm-hmm. they're hitting mm-hmm. on a playground.
Or now, in line is really bad.
What's the emotionally appropriate fear handling strategy that we want them to have?
To be able to go to a teacher, an aide, a counselor, someone that says, this is how I'm feeling. But, right. I want to tie it back to negative internal working model. If that child still has the belief, I'm bad and I can't trust you, there's no way this child's going to be able to feel safe enough to go to that staff and say, I'm feeling this right now.
And it's important to notice as you look at going back to schools do not have a really high toleration for fight, flight, freeze, and fold responses, do they?
No, I mean, they're a little better with freeze. Usually those are the kids that don't cause any problems. They're just withdrawn, or the ones who give in.
So if you get children who haven't developed the ability to emotionally regulate at an age-appropriate level, understand that the fear fest engendered by the transitions of going back to school are going to develop into behaviors. What kind of behaviors come from fight, flight, freeze, or fold? Obviously hitting, punching, kicking, yelling,
running. We have a lot of kids that, mm-hmm. The staff, they have to have one-on-one staff because mm-hmm. they'll run. We've had kids that have left buildings, hide in other classrooms. There's in lockers, there's chutes in the building. How many times have you gone to school looking for a kid,
One of the principle number one that we teach is that our brains are designed to prioritize fear over all other things. Mm-hmm. So when a child is experiencing fear, their child is going to take care, our child is going to take care of that fear first. Yeah. That means rule breaking. Mm-hmm. Because rule breaking makes you feel a little bit more in control. And when your brain is defaulted to taking care of a fear, you don't really care about the school's rules, do you?
No. So
all your brain really wants is that fear to go away.
So let's go back to the idea where the teacher gives you, little Jimmy, a new pencil and says, okay, you need to hold it this way so that your penmanship looks better. What's going to happen to little Jimmy when the teacher says, hold this pencil, when little Jimmy doesn't have the physical skill to hold that pencil?
Well, I'm just going to give you a possible scenario.
Okie doke.
And it doesn't have anything to do with the fact that I've struggled with holding a pencil all my life. So first off, little Jimmy, when he tries to hold that pencil and write with it, he's going to squeeze it way too hard. And he's going to put an inappropriate amount of pressure down on the paper. Yeah. So when the paper tears or the pencil breaks, okay, Jimmy's frustration level is going to go up. After
Mhm.
the third or fourth time, the teacher's frustration level is going to go up. As everyone's frustration level goes up, Jimmy's going to default to fight, flight, freeze, or fold, and he might
Mhm.
run away out of the classroom. He might throw that pencil at the teacher. Okay. He might throw it down on the floor and just use inappropriate language, which would, in most school settings, get them sent out of the classroom, which again, by the way, makes the trigger go away, the
Yeah.
short-term trigger go away. So any of those type of behaviors could result from not having the developmental ability to handle fear and or the developmental ability to physically manipulate a pen or pencil.
Yeah, so we're thinking, think of all the developmental delays, all the areas that children may struggle, whether it's, playground, in a classroom, like a kid that I was referencing earlier, whose family had no books.
Mhm.
And to be challenged with each of those, again, your fear fest word
Yeah.
and all
Every
the behaviors.
every
Go ahead.
place that you don't have age appropriate skills mastered, the environment around you tends to send you "you suck" messages.
Yeah.
Okay, you're no good, you're not good enough, you're not as good as the rest of us, and of course that's just going to highlight that negative internal working model. It's going to reinforce it in your child. Without this cycle being interrupted, this child is going to get worse. So the first thing we recommend for developmental delays and negative internal working model is always narrate the sources of fear, use parts,
Mhm.
and talk about what your child is experiencing. Even if they didn't have the ability or the option to talk about being scared before with an emotionally attuned caregiver, we have the option to be that emotionally attuned caregiver now, and we can encourage that verbalization.
I like when you mention parts and the part of me, we can join the child. Like, man, there's a part of me that gets triggered every time I think about holding a pencil too. I'm thinking that you can join with the child over the holding the pencil piece.
Yeah, it's important to remember that we all went through the same developmental stages that the children are going through. Okay, so we all, at some level, we all had the same fears that the children are experiencing. We might have gotten over them a little earlier than the traumatized child, but we had those parts too. We need it as adults. It's our job to get in touch with those parts within ourselves and to share with the child the strategies that work for us.
And what, I go back to Dan Hughes's PACE all the time. And by using the P, the playfulness, when you can join with your child and when you can be playful around, whether it's holding a pencil or, yeah, I had to struggle in learning to kick a ball too, it doesn't seem so big. It's like, yeah, that was tough. I hated it. I went through pencils all the time. Grandma was threatening to only give me pencils for Christmas because I used to break all my pencils. When we can be playful, it takes away some of the fear, some of that deepness to it.
The world that the foster and adopt world where we're inviting children to be a part of, the majority of the fear they're experiencing is not necessary.
Right.
We do have them in safe environments as a rule, but the trick is getting them to recognize it and deal with it.
Yeah. So 2 interventions. One was narrate. The second one was using parts. And then the third one, really, sometimes we need to intervene. As parents, we need to talk to teachers and say, my child has a history of trauma and they're struggling with just the fine grip, the pincer grip.
So are you suggesting that we adjust the environment to provide opportunities for developmentally immature actions?
Yeah, sometimes we actually may need to see that our child gets some kind of special OT or PT for different things. The whole running, kicking a ball, more practice. We need to get out and practice with our kids. We need to help with those things. We need to have the staff school staff available and recognizing these same TDCs.
So remember
Okay.
we would like our audience to remember that the TDCs are ways of looking at behaviors, specifically the origins of behaviors that do not deliver you suck messages to the child, but instead give them ways to heal and fix themselves.
It is so important not to shame or criticize this child, because now we're back to the negative internal working model again. It is so important to be encouraging, to be playful, to be emotionally attuned to what's going on with our children.
So this is a somewhat longer video than normal.
But
Thank
it's
you
back
for
to school time.
It's back to school time.
Right. So check us out on earlytrauma.com, our Facebook and Instagram and Pinterest. It's Fayette Early Trauma on Pinterest. Thanks for watching.
Bye.
Bye.